My name is Benjamin. I'm a very proud Mexican and Latin American. And I thought I would give you a little bit of context. So we wanted to cater this event for everyone, not only people from Latin America, but also for people that were in other parts of the world, in developing economies, and that wanted to come and learn from a region. So that being said, and after the words of the ambassador, this next panel, we're going to be talking about the opportunities and challenges we have as a region. So please welcome our next panel, Navigating Uncertainty, Latin America's Role in a Shifting Global Order. Please welcome Andrés Arusca, Director of Brazil Studies Institute of King's College, Juan Terán Jurado, Head of Corporate Affairs of Canning House, Jaime Diaz, Executive Vice President of the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, and Zacharias Ayoub, Trade Commissioner to the UK from Costa Rica. Please welcome them with a round of applause.
Okay, so I thought it would be great to have everyone introduce themselves a little bit and continue this conversation around representation from all across Latin America. So of course we've gotten the perspective of the Dominican Republic and of Costa Rica, but this is a very exciting panel from that perspective as well, because we have lots of Latin America's largest economies represented on this panel too. So I will turn it to Andresa to introduce herself and provide a little bit of context around Brazil.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank all the organizers. I think we can all agree that this is a fascinating event. My name is Andresa, and I'm the director of the King's Brazil Institute, and I was previously here at the University of Oxford directing the Brazilian Studies program at the Latin American Center. So it's always a pleasure to come back. And I see some familiar faces as well, so it's very good to see them. And well, speaking about Latin America and Brazil today, I don't know, Melissa, if I can already give you a little bit of context to the region, because talking from a non-commercial perspective, but as an academic, I think when we think about business opportunity in Latin America and we think about the political economy of the region, it's good to also think of why we talk about Latin America and why it is important to see ourselves as a region. And when we think about our historical past and our economic landscape, I think it becomes very clear that the export of commodities, for example, is one thing that unifies a lot of us in the region. And the export of commodities has been there since colonial times. Like, we know that Latin America has been producing primary goods to the world since the very early days. However, there was a time when we think about the substitution of imports that we try to, via protecting our industries, to diminish this reliability on importing manufacturers and exporting commodities, because it was very clear that this was creating a very difficult dependency, a very difficult development trap, where we would export like cheap products, we would import manufacturers, and how would we change that cycle? So this was an effort that was done through protectionism, development of industries in Latin America, and foreign debt. And we know that when the debt changed around the 70s, we had the 1980s in Latin America, which was called the lost decade. And at that time, when countries start to default and their economies start to shrink, and we had the so-called Washington Consensus and a decade of economic change in the region, we had to rethink that. What are we going to do? How is Latin America gonna invest? And then we had different cycles where we had like pink tide and so on. And now I think it's the time, and we can talk a little bit more how Latin America has been still like reprimarizing, still investing in the exports of commodities, but what has changed as well, like with some countries like Brazil, for example, also heavily industrialized. So in terms of change and continuity, I think we have a lot to think about. But above all, I think it's important to say that some of those challenges refer to all countries. And that's why as a Brazilianist, I'm also a Latin Americanist, because I do believe that the example of Brazil and the challenge of Brazil, they're also true for many other countries in the region. And it's very important that we learn from countries such as Costa Rica, which is one enormous example in the region. And when we talk about Brazil's leadership or the biggest economy in the region, I don't think that goes without challenge, because I think there are many lessons for Brazil still to learn. But I will stop here because I think we have a lot to talk today. Thank you.
Thank you, Andressa. And I think that sets us up. I think that really sets us up to hear from the rest of the panel, so I will let them introduce themselves, but you'll see, I'm sure, that they've been doing a lot of this work around changing the way that the economies in Latin America have been structured historically. So I'll turn it to Zacarias.
Well, very good morning for all being here, and thank you for having us today. It is a privilege for us and for the country be a part of this audience. In terms of what we do from Costa Rica, we come from a small economy. You have to consider that Costa Rica, we're 5 million people. So since we have memories, we need to do more in terms to access the markets that we have. Since we have launched our office here in the UK over a year ago, our mission has always diversify, as my colleague was saying, diversifying what it could be understood as commodities. It's always to be in contact with the potential customers here in the UK and try to offer added value in the different sectors that we propose to be. So for us, it has been a challenging experience because since we started with the fresh product sector, such as the pineapples and such as the banana, and now we have become our larger main sport are medical devices. Now we have become going into services. Now we have gone into education right now. So it's a constant effort of diversifying, and providing alternatives to our clusters in our region, and try to make the best alliance for our exports and in terms of investment to try to bring always an added value to our economy. That's the key factor.
Thank you, Zacarias. And I think that tees us up for Jaime's introduction, so he can talk to kind of his work around what he's done for the whole of Central America.
Well, thank you, Melissa, and I appreciate what you are doing with Benjamin to put this, Latin American Forum. I think this is a legacy and the first of permanent, way in which business, investment, and economic policy can be discussed at the highest level in Oxford. So my name is Jaime. I am acting Vice President of the Central American Bank for Economic Integration. It's an amazing institution. 65 years ago, 5 countries in Central America, just 1 year after the IDB was created, a couple of years after the IDA Fund for Economic Development from the World Bank Group was created, just gathered together, put $20 million, $4 million every country, and they put some capital and they said, we're going to invest in our future. And the future is how are we going to create a region that's integrated? Because, like Zacarias was saying, we are all small countries, but if we scale up the countries and we integrate our countries, our region is going to be more valuable. Today, we have over $20 billion in assets. We have the best credit rating in Latin America, and we are an innovative institution. We have the first woman president, Costa Rican Gisela Sanchez. You have the youngest vice president in the history, and we've been, doing amazing jobs, leveraging funds to tackle the most sustainable challenges. Most daunting challenges such as climate, sustainable investment, human development, infrastructure, and helping the private sector to grow and the governments to invest in critical, challenges like what Andrea was saying. And finally, I just want to say, what the story I am telling you from Central America also can scale up and replicate for Latin America. And that's why I see that these kind of spaces, like the one that Oxford is putting together, and you, that your business students, is so valuable. Just put some numbers. 7.2% of GDP is produced in Latin America. It's highly underrepresented. Latin America can do more. And I think if we can see our region as a whole as an scapegoat of this uncertainty and of these challenges, this could be, the opportunity for the region to leverage and gain more prominence in the economic voice of the region.
So I will let Juan speak a little bit more about this point of integration from his perspective as former trade commissioner to Ecuador, and now working on some of these bridging initiatives that we've been talking about this morning at Canning House.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you, Melissa, thank you, Benjamin, and thank you to my compatriota Maria Jose for the invitation. As mentioned, my name is Juan Terán Jurado. I'm the head of corporate affairs at Canning House. I'm also the co-chair of the Anglo-Ecuadorian Society, and I was the former trade commissioner of Ecuador in Germany. I would like to start by highlighting some facts about the importance of the Andean region in the world. Of course, I will focus more on Ecuador because of my experience, but I will start with Colombia. So the first thing to mention is that Colombia is the second more biodiverse country in the world. It is also the third largest exporter of coffee, and is the largest exporter of emeralds in the world. Then Peru is number 6 in biodiversity, is number 3 in reserves of copper, number 4 on zinc. It's the largest exporter of blueberries, and also is the second exporter of copper and zinc. Bolivia is number 9 in biodiversity, is also number 10 in lithium reserves, is number 7 on zinc export, and also is number 4 in tin export. And Ecuador is the largest exporter of bananas, is the largest exporter of shrimp, is the second largest exporter in the world of canned tuna, and also is the most biodiverse country by square meter in the world. So this is to give you a little bit of context why the Andean region in this case is relevant. As I have already mentioned, it's key for the extraction of minerals for the energy transition, and also is a source of food for the world.
Amazing. So we will get back to the point on commodities and crucial minerals later on the panel and later today. But I won't bury the lead any longer. I mentioned at the beginning that this is a context-setting conversation and that we would be addressing kind of the geopolitical moment that we find ourselves in. And the ambassador from Costa Rica mentioned that we have to account for and talk about kind of the situation in the United States and the policies of the new administration and what that means for the region, and how Latin America needs to revisit some of its traditional partnerships and expand kind of its strategic outreach. So I think we can start with that question for all of you. How should Latin America kind of position itself amid this changing dynamic with its largest, oldest traditional partner, the United States?
How do you want to start?
We'll go like around, or?
I think President Lula's visit to France is already saying a lot, and the how can I say, desperate attempt to start like a bigger partnership of Mercosur with the European Union. I believe this is also can be mutually beneficial, as both sides are facing of course, tariffs and issues with trade with the United States. China also overcame the United States in terms of being the biggest trade partner in the case of Brazil. But above all, like the issue of diversification will come back here, I guess, because they have a dependency on partners, and also on what is exported to those partners is always a vulnerability. Because of the dependency, like if a country such as China deaccelerates or stops importing from a country such as Brazil, then the effects are quite immediate. Also, it's vulnerable because of what is being exported. We know very well that the reliance on commodities exports is also a climate difficulty. Whenever you have a natural phenomenon and that can impact on the price of those commodities or the availability of, for example, rice or beans or corn or something like that, any of the crops, that is a problem. When you have an environmental disasters, as we had in Brazil with dams that bursted, then that's also a vulnerability. So diversifying the economy, diversifying the economic partners, I think become more evident than ever. And I think there are now efforts to do that as soon as possible.
Also, the situation that is going on right now, it obliges we as a country, as I mentioned before, you need to diversify. You need not to place all your eggs on the same basket. So we have been doing this for ages, trying to look into the products and to look at the different sectors to try to achieve and try to say, well, hopefully because we have a high dependency from the US market, we understand that, but we also have many strategies in order to access different sectors in different countries. Thus, in the case of the UK, what we're trying to achieve, just a quick example, we have a base pineapple that goes into the supermarkets, but we also try to work out with the juice, with the frozen pineapple, with the convenience stores, and try to work along with partners in how we can access better the supermarket in different segments. That's a key factor. So I think an answer is to try to diversify not just the products, but also the channels and the regions as well.
Yeah, well, I believe like this is the opportunity not to tackle only diversification, which is, I will say, the number one policy that you need to take, but also to reinforce your regional alliances or partnerships that you have. Because the way I see it, like when we look at Central America and Mexico and the Caribbean, it's the most related to the US market. When you look at the elasticity, the correlation between, growth or trade is higher in this region than South America or the Andean countries. But what's very interesting is like for all Central American countries, the main trading partner is the US, but the second biggest one is the region of Central America. I'm putting an example so that you understand. Most of the time that we have to talk to, I will say, Salvador authorities, like a Minister of Infrastructure, to help to open the way for customs or bridges to finish in order to enhance trade with Guatemala. Or we are always talking like how, like more containers can go to San Pedro Sula, the port in the Caribbean, such that more exports from Guatemala can also get, faster to the US market. So the thing is, when you see that the US is having an expected economic growth that is going to be less, it's going to be reduced. The recent IMF says that it's around expecting 1% less economic growth for this year compared to their forecast last October. That you need to just recognize that probably the answer to keep growing is first in diversifying the products, the regions, but also to strengthen your partnerships. And when I look to the region in Central America, Latin America, it was only 0.4% revised downward economic growth, which was less, than the US. And the second thing is when you look at Central America was not, touched. Actually, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, and Costa Rica are growing over 4% expected by the IMF. That means that's double, the size of Latin America, that's 2%. So again, I'm coming back to say, during times of uncertainty, just reinforce your neighbor alliances, the regional alliances, and I think Latin America could be an interesting way in which you can look at opportunities to diversify the destination for your trade and investment as well.
Thank you, Jaime. And Juan, I'll let you answer the question, and I'll add another little element to that, which is I think we've received some examples from the rest of the panel about some of the strategies that Latin American governments are already leveraging to kind of address this moment. But what would be some of your recommendations around ideas for how Latin America can strengthen its voice in seeking some of these outside partnerships and responding to this moment?
Well, I think in general, Latin America needs to be pragmatic about the decisions that we take. We have to diversify our markets. We cannot depend on any specific country to export our products. But at the same time, I think the position now that we're facing with our largest trading partner is also an opportunity for Latin America. As you may know, well, as you know, the US administration has imposed tariffs to the world. Most of the tariffs were higher or were tried to put higher to the competitors of Latin America. So that actually gives an advantage to the Latin American countries. We need to keep positioning ourselves as a reliable supplier for all our markets. We don't get involved into world issues like wars and other things that could affect the political relation between the US and Latin America. And also it's the proximity to the US market. We are close to the US. We have similar views on how society works. We're more Occidental than other countries. So I think we are positioned in a strategic situation right now, even though it's very it changed very fast. At the same time, I think we have an opportunity now to continue to deepen our relations with the US specifically.
So to your point about being a reliable supplier, and we've talked a little bit here and there about commodities and what we're currently exchanging with our existing partners. What are, first of all, your thoughts on kind of moving away from reliance in the region on commodities, or diversifying away from commodities? And what are some strategic sectors that you would flag as being really important and really promising in Latin America at the moment? So I'll actually start with Jaime, and then on this I'd love your thoughts.
Well, thank you. I believe what we need to take, I think the ambassador put a nice example. We are one of the regions with the most important, so we are a sustainable region. We have biodiversity. So our natural capital is very important and is there for the world. When we talk about critical minerals as well, we have that. So when you look at that, we have a sector where we need more research, more innovation, how to do it in a sustainable way, in a base-or-naze, solution. I think climate transition in the region is accelerating at a pace that we cannot see in any other area. And I think with that, you can have a solid foundation to start going and look at different sectors. Then, look, food security is still an issue in the world. Climate change is here to stay, and the crises are coming in a different sizes and also in a different level. So I think we need to keep seeing, not only adaptation, but also how we can enhance, value chains in terms of food. And like Zacharias said, it's not only about commodities, putting more value added and doing it in a sustainable way. Third, population. I told you about the voice that we have in terms of economic, representation, 72%. In terms of population, we are 8%, but you know what? 8% with a lot of youth. Look at this panel, I don't know about the age, but and we are the happiest region in the world. So I think the human capital, and it's great to be here in Oxford because this is a bet. It's an investment that will have important returns to the region. So you look at Central America, in the country I represent, I'm from Guatemala, the age in average is 30 years old. So you still have there a possibility to keep investing in services, in the digital transition, in a different way. And finally, but not last, we need to get involved and be more active into the new industrial policy. So the revolution of AI is something that is changing the world already, will change and will shift the way we work. And we need to be leaders and we need to take accountability of this transition as well in our countries and not just adapt the technologies or just follow. We need to take away and more voice in these new technologies.
And those are your thoughts on commodities and strategic sectors.
Yes, I will move to the case of Brazil more specifically, just to give some examples. What happened with Brazil, like different from countries such as the UK that deindustrialized and invested more in finance and knowledge, Brazil did not deindustrialize in that sense, but it reprimarized its industrial assets. So the lack of diversification comes from like more finance lines and more opportunities in the sectors that are related to commodities, especially the agribusiness, the oil, and mining. The consequence of that has been that the country has become more expensive without people becoming wealthier or not equally wealthier. So it compensates some foreign direct investments, it compensates some investors, it generates a more reliable currency that creates makes the country literally more expensive, creates more local inflation. However, the population are not becoming wealthier because there's also heavily unequal job opportunities that are created. And not to mention that extractive industries are also labor intense, so you create few jobs, not a lot as you used to do in the past. And the jobs you create, they are very unequally compensated. So you create some jobs for engineers on top levels, but you also create very poorly paid jobs when you create a lot of jobs at all. So in my research, for example, we show that the biggest assets in mining are not the biggest assets in job creation. So there is a mismanagement there, and that is not always in the public discourse. So people still think that investing on that will generate growth and will generate development, and that's now the discussion currently in Brazil with exploring oil in the Amazon basin. That a lot of senators, even people who are traditionally from the left, from progressive governments, and from environmental sectors, they are saying, no, we need that to create jobs. There is absolutely no evidence that this will create a lot of jobs or that those jobs will be for locals. If anything, there is a migration of certain skilled labor for the few job positions that are created. And there is a massive gender inequality when those jobs are created. So that is a very necessary point to take into account. The laws of biodiversity, the environmental laws, migration issues, health issues, inflation, inequality, and gender. And then what are we doing to change that? Well, there are some initiatives to create something like sovereign funds. I don't know if you've heard about that. For example, the state of Espírito Santo has one because of dependencies on oil. But the sovereign funds are usually run by banks. And no offense to any bankers, but banks, they... But banks, they are also protecting their assets. So the banks are not gonna, when they talk about rediversifying and invest in sovereign funds, they will not put their money in the local bakery of Mr. Jose. They will put their money sometimes in some of the leading industries. So it's not necessarily, again, empowering society as a whole, and not especially empowering those who have been at laws with land laws and evictions and so on. So sovereign funds are just not enough in terms of who they benefit. And then what we have is the happiest and one of the youngest generation, regions in the world, but also with a very great perspective in terms of labor markets. So in Brazil, and just to finish, a lot of young people are now moving to the gig economy, informal sectors, and informality is huge in the region again, but with precarization, and we know with COVID-19 the dangers of these precarious day-to-day earnings, and the military services, which the propensity of young people to join the army in Brazil is up to 45%. That doesn't mean enlistment, but like how likely you are, how much you'd like a job in the armed forces, as high as that. So think about our past with military dictatorships. I think that is also worrisome. Thank you.
So I think that really brings me to my next question for Juan, actually, around institutions and political stability in the region, which is something that often gets cited in conversations around foreign direct investment in Latin America, but also its ability to kind of diversify in this way. So Juan, would you speak to kind of political instability, stability in the region, institutions, and kind of what we can do on that side of the equation?
I think we need to keep working on our institutions. One of the biggest problems Latin America has is that we don't have a unified voice when we negotiate or in the international arena in general. So basically, we negotiate our agreements in a one-to-one basis. And let's be honest, when you have a larger economy, for example, negotiating a trade agreement with a smaller economy, the larger economy will have the advantage. So it's not the same situation. It would be better if we could negotiate in a multilateral or a group of countries like the Andean Community or Mercosur or any other institution. So we need to keep working on the integration of Latin America. We can start, I think, with small steps, having maybe a South American integration, and then continue to do something larger that accounts all Latin America. But I also think what we can do, and it's a little bit more practical, is to have innovative ideas. I wanted to mention about a specific tool that the Ecuadorian government used recently, 2 years ago. So the Ecuadorian government executed a debt for nature swap for the conservation of the Galapagos Islands. So this was basically the Ecuadorian government purchasing bonds at a discounted rate and then selling blue bonds linked to the conservation of the Galapagos Islands. So this saved the Ecuadorian government around $700 million US dollars in payment of interest and the bonds itself. And also it helps the conservation of one of the most biodiverse regions in the world. So the people who bought actually the bonds were, institutions who bought the bonds were also interested in supporting this initiative. And in this case, they were also benefited because the new bonds were also supported by the Inter-American Development Bank and by the DFC of the United States. So the certainty of the payment of the bonds was higher than before. A second exercise was I have to mention, this was the largest ever debt swap conversion that had happened in the world until that time. 1 year later, Ecuador did the same, but in this case for the protection of the water resources in the Amazon region. So they again bought bonds from the bonds, and they sold new nature-linked bonds for the conservation of the Amazon. And between these two executions, Ecuador saved almost $1 billion. And also the people who bought the bonds had a certainty that they were going to be paid because of the support of the Inter-American Development Bank and also from the DFC of the US. So in general, I think we should have new ideas and see ways in which we can portray Latin America as an important player in the international arena in general.
Yeah, thank you for those examples. I think those were amazing. And I will turn to Zacarias, because I think Costa Rica has also, traditionally been a country that really innovates in terms of aligning kind of economic growth with nature-based solutions and social equity. So can you share from Costa Rica's example, kind of what practices some of the other economies in Latin America can institute to kind of build and innovate in this way?
I think although we have gathered three beautiful countries here, but I'll have to say the situation with Brazil. Brazil is a continent, right? It's a huge country. But Ecuador is a large country. We have to recognize our difference in terms of size and population. That's how the strategy comes along, right? Three pillars in our case. First, you need to work as a cluster from the origin. You need to work as a joint team together in order to plan a strategy specific to either you go to a destination or distribution. The other factor that I consider this, we need to go along with is the country brand. You need to allocate not the company, but the country brand that supports the companies that goes along in your effort. And third, you need to have a presence. Meaning you need to be close to your potential customers all the time. You need to have a presence in key events, like trade shows, like missions, like agendas, and to know the needs of the market in order to let them know what you can provide, and also to hear from them how can you adapt the product and services to their needs in the market. With those three pillars, you can start understanding how you can, again, sorry for reinventing the word, to diversify and to adapt the product. Universities, for us, are a key factor. We have a cluster of the University of Costa Rica, so for us it's a privilege being here in order to see what alliances can we make between students, how alliances can go between universities, how can we go together in terms of investigation, in terms of an exchange of knowledge, and all, because everything comes from the universities in order to be implemented with the companies and eventually with the country. Three basic factors.
Thank you for that. And I think that that's the point at which I'm going to turn it to the students in the room and everyone else, and see if there are any audience questions for our panelists. If you just raise your hand. Yeah, we have somebody here and here. So in the white shirt here in the middle.
Hey, morning everyone. My name is Sebastian. I come from LC. And I would like you to ask for your vision to what is needed to strengthen the intra-regional trade. Because in these times of uncertainty, many stakeholders point that Latin America should integrate more. And one of the things we see in these kind of trade unions, that like the European Union, is that the trade intra-region, it's a very large part of that economic movement. What is needed in Latin America to see Colombia commercing more with Ecuador and Costa Rica and the other countries within Latin America, especially in the scope and because I think it's part of how we can surpass this idea of just exporting commodities and give more value added to all the products that we produce. What is needed for?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to add to it because I think all of you also mentioned integration quite a bit. And there was a little bit of conversation before the panel about the possibility of a Latin American bloc and having kind of that level of collaboration across the region. So if you could speak to kind of the possibility, viability of something like that.
Yeah, maybe I would start for answering the trade, and probably Zacarias also knows a lot because it's what his vocation is. But I think look, who trades is firms with firms, right? Like private sector. So it's very important that you amplify the channels. That like the broadband of trade should be amplified. But sometimes what we do, or what countries do, not intentionally, is that you have problems. Like think about this like a cable, like a broadband. Sometimes signal doesn't come easily when you have your phone and is disconnected. What are the main problems or binding constraints to trade? That's the first thing that you have to ask. And usually is to have a stable economy. When investors look outside the region of Latin America, what's the number one thing that they ask or question? What do you think? Political instability, some said here. So that is kind of the thing. And to be honest, like I come from a region and you look at the reports, the instability is less than the perception. And we need to keep, investing in that, making institutions that are solid. That's first. Second is infrastructure. When you see how much it takes for a shipping, container to go from Latin American countries to the major markets in the world, or to trade from Mexico to South America to Central America, you have very daunting challenges from optimization of ports, of operations, of logistics. So you need to have this level playing field very well. Andresa said something important. Is also the sophistication of businesses, and where you have good jobs, quality jobs happen. You need to keep, business that are able to export. And I remember there's a famous paper, and I will not go through it, but just try to read it. It's called like You Are What You Export from Danny Roderick. The name is, and the thing is, you need to be intentional on choosing the sectors, like he said, and create good quality of jobs. And the jobs are going to come from middle sizes for firms that are able to create hundreds of jobs, because the informality is the reality in the region. So I don't think the small and medium enterprise, the informal sector, is not the one that's going to be exporting that much. It's going to come from creating these elements for entrepreneurs to grow. But sorry, I can keep talking about this later on during the coffee time.
So I think we have time for one more question. I saw a hand here. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Diego Salama. I'm an executive MBA here. I want to push you a little bit on this integration thing, because we seem to be talking a lot about things that the private sector can do and so on, but let's talk about the politics for a second. The processes of integration in the region seem to be aligned more politically, so the people who like each other create yet another alliance, yet another community. Let's forget about the OAS because we don't like it for some reason, and then the Pacific Alliance is there. There's the Mercosur is there. Is the Andean community still alive? I'm not entirely sure. So what are the real possibilities that we can depoliticize political integration that can then lead to the actual creation of a Latin American bloc? Is this really even possible?
I don't think this was for me.
Yes, I think, well, it's difficult. I think,
So I think the Andean, he would let you know that the Andean region is still alive.
yeah. It's difficult because, as you mentioned, most of the associations, trade associations or blocs are created according to political views. And when the political views change in one specific country, then the whole institution is dismantled. So it's a little bit, it's a challenge that we have in Latin America, but I think actually I do agree with my colleagues that this has to be pushed by the private sector. But because when there is a necessity for integration, then the political sphere will follow. So I think we should invest, and going back a little bit to the previous question, in promoting inter-regional trade, but for that we need better connections between our countries, because one of the main issues is that we are not well connected to export and import from neighbor countries and within even the region, and also to diversify, because most of the countries in Latin America have very concentrated exports in specific products, and most of them are producing the same. So we produce fruits, we produce oil and gas and this kind of minerals. So if we produce the same, then we're not gonna buy from each other because we are exporters of that specific product. So we need to diversify and create a necessity for businesses to trade more together, and then after that it will come the integration. But at this moment, the only thing that I think it will actually create pragmatic integration, in regional integration in Latin America, even it is not the whole Latin America, it will be political will. When politicians decide that it's beneficial for the region itself and not only for a specific kind of point of view from left or right, then we will integrate in a better way that we have done until this moment.
We'll bring them to Oxford. We'll have them meet here. Thank you all so much. Please help me thank our panelists.